All right, well, thank you, Janet. So my name is Mike Fuller. I'm a program manager out at Northrop Grumman, working NASA programs. I've been out there about 18 years. And I'm going to not bore you with too many details about myself because I'm really the facilitator of the conversation. We're going to get right into the meat of the conversation and really talk about, let these folks who have all of the information talk to you and kind of present a vision of habitation on both Moon and Mars. So first up, we're going to talk with Danny Harris. He's from NASA. He's the manager for Habitation Systems Office at Marshall, and also is the Habitation's concepts lead up at headquarters. And Danny, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you run with it.
Oh, okay, thank you. Let's see. So as Mike says, I sort of have at least a couple of jobs. I am the manager of the Habitation Systems Development Office at Marshall Space Flight Center, and within that, part of what our team does, and I lead that effort, we lead the Exploration Systems Development Mission Directorate's Habitation Concept Pre-Formulation effort. Well, what does that mean? So we, for those future habitats, things like a lunar surface habitat, a Mars transit habitat, potentially Mars surface habitats in the future, we do the NASA reference architecture development, acquisition strategies, early requirements, ground rules and assumptions, working across the broad architecture community for the lunar architecture team and the Mars architecture team. We also engage with industry and with some of these folks on the stage with me directly through a public-private partnership with the Next Step BAA. We also work with international partners for potential contributions to Artemis and eventually toward Mars for things related to habitation. Right now we're working a lot with the Italians as an example for potential habitation contributions. So today, I think we're trying to do like 7 or 8 minutes here each. I chose to focus, because this is a Humans to Mars Summit, on the Mars Transit Hab work. So we'll talk a little bit about Mars Transit Hab, but questions can go wherever. We can talk any habitation architecture questions across the whole Artemis and Mars architecture. So what is a transit hab? And what I'm going to talk about here is our NASA reference architecture, right? So by definition, it's probably not the thing that'll get built, right? It'll be an industry or some sort of collaboration. But we work with industry on industry concepts that informs what we do on our reference architecture, and then we work back with industry to help you guys refine your concepts. So right now, our NASA reference architecture for the transit hab would support 4 crew for that 2 or 3 year Mars round-trip mission. It also, and I'm going to talk quite a bit about this, it goes to Gateway in NRHO in lunar orbit and stays there for a long time, several years before we're ready for departure on the Mars mission. And that's really important because the transit hab gives Gateway that added volume and habitation capability, both technology-wise and just space-wise, to you get beyond the shorter crewed missions up to, beyond 60 days. So you can start to really use transit hab and Gateway and the Artemis surface infrastructure as an analog for Mars. So you have the opportunity to learn the lessons that you wouldn't learn until you're actually in practice, to prove out the technologies, to adjust to those lessons learned, and do all that while you're in you're not a year away on the way to Mars, right? So back to our transit hab reference architecture. Right now, as you can tell by that picture and others coming, it's a hybrid inflatable metallic structure. Not saying it has to be. Industry, some folks are looking at inflatable structures, others aren't. We right now are showing a hybrid structure. As I mentioned, it would dock with Gateway for several years prior to the large Mars propulsion stage showing up for transit hab to undock from Gateway, made up with the propulsion stage and depart for the Mars mission. It has contingency airlock and EVA capability. It's designed for a 15-year life, so multiple uses, even more than one use to Mars, depending on the timing. And of course, it builds on space station investments and industry investments in deep space habitation. And we are working to plans both for the transit hab itself and the technology that's needed for it to have that in NRHO at Gateway in been intentionally ambiguous, early to mid 2030s. So a little bit redundant here, but sort of putting that into a picture, you see that transit hab would launch from Earth, obviously, go to Gateway, where it serves to be further outfitted and definitely outfitted with all the logistics and spares you'd need for that long Mars mission, right? So its departure mass for Mars is nearly twice its delivery mass to Gateway, and that's logistics and spares predominantly. Then after that period as serving as an analog for Mars and lessons learned from that incorporated into the architecture, departs for the Mars mission for a 2 to 3 year round trip, depending on how that mission is designed, returns back to NRHO where it can be refurbed and reused for a subsequent mission. So I want to use this slide to really hit the importance of that, using the moon, the whole system, transit hab's part of that, as an analog to the Mars mission. The ability to buy down risk is fundamentally important, not just with the technology and the systems, but with the human. Exercising more Earth independence before you have to really count on it on a Mars mission where you're not just hours away in Leo, but you're much farther away in the lunar environment is a cornerstone of what Artemis needs to do to enable Mars. In fact, the transit hab itself is the one element that truly bridges both Artemis and its Mars forward, right? So it's there for several years in the Artemis system, helping prepare for Mars. And so this is really redundant, but I liked it because it has so many pretty pictures of our artist rendering. So I think with that sort of wraps up my talk.
All right, Danny. Thanks for the overview. Appreciate the discussion and especially the tie-in between Artemis and Moon to Mars. It's an important bridge between the two. So appreciate you giving us some insight into that. Next up, we're going to go to Mike Elsperman. Sorry about that. Mike has been with Boeing for a number of years. I won't go into exactly how many.
A couple.
But Mike has been Director of Exploration for the International Space Station program currently, and has been involved in various NASA endeavors throughout his career. So has a wide breadth of knowledge on exactly the various portions of the working environment within NASA and within industry. So Mike, I turn the time over to you.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mike Elsperman, as Mike said, Director of Exploration for Boeing. I want to build on what Danny's presentation talked about. Mars Transit Hab is really key, but there are some technology needs that are really important and some challenges that have to be overcome in order for us to make this a successful mission, a successful campaign, and make it sustainable. So, kind of redundant agenda. Just get an overview of habitation, technology gaps, and then look at common products. That's another thing I want to talk about. And then back to Danny's point about proving grounds to really make sure all these systems work before we put people in them and put them in harm's way. Habitation's a critical capability for exploration. The recent architecture that NASA released has a bunch of different elements in it. Habitation, is you can see, is a center point of just about every place we go. Leo, the gateway, lunar surface, and eventually to Mars. It's got to shelter and keep people alive in some pretty serious environmental conditions for long periods of time, upwards of 1,200 days or longer on going to Mars. It's got to be, the thing is with these systems, and when the experience at ISS and International Space Station is we can return, and if we have a problem, we can bring the crews back. We can resupply them. It's going to take some high reliability systems to safe, and also mass is really key for all of these missions, and having high reliable systems. And oh, is that not working?
Excuse me.
No, I'm going to drop. Oops. Am I good now? Okay, that's better, thanks. So yeah, high reliability systems, and also the aspects of crew health and performance, which I think have been not really emphasized as much. I believe there was a talk earlier today that talked about the importance of factoring that into the early design and the operations of the system. So advanced health monitoring is really key. But extensibility, once you do a development on one of these habitat systems, it would be really beneficial from a cost and schedule perspective to make sure that those components can be extensible to other applications. So if you develop a system for the gateway, things that we can use there to put on the Mars Transit Hab or the Lunar Surface Hab, that all makes the development less risky and just maximizes our investment. But early development testing is really going to be key for these systems. We need to start now. I believe that the presentation earlier today talked about a 2033 flyby. Boeing's very big on that mission, and we think it's a great starting point, but we need to start now. It takes 10 years to build a big system like that, and we're right at the cusp of getting that started and hopefully flying in the mid-2030s to Mars. So in terms of capabilities that you need for a habitation system, they're kind of listed here, and I should have worn my glasses because I can't really see that, but I'll just wing it from memory. Avionics at the top, there we go. Real critical capability from a reliability perspective. Your flight computers and all of your associated avionics have to be able to survive the deep space radiation environment for a long period of time, 15 years. Leo, I think we've got that one pretty handled, but for Moon and Moon Gateway and Mars environment, we've got some work to do there. Primary structure is also another key area of development that we feel is important to invest in. Danny's architecture for NASA mentioned the hybrid inflatable metallic concepts. We're looking at similar concepts. We've got an all metallic concept that's really based on our ISS heritage, but goes to a larger diameter and uses some advanced materials to reduce mass. We're also looked at a hybrid situation and also looking at composites as a potential primary structure material. So there's some definite maturity that has to happen there in terms of TRL and MRL, manufacturing readiness. ECLS, probably the biggest hurdle. They're all tough, especially the red ones. Closing the loop on ECLS is really critical. You can't take enough supplies with you once again, from a mass standpoint, so you've got to really reuse everything you can in terms of water and air and things that the crew is going to need. There's still a lot of development going on there. I know that they're doing some testing on Space Station on some of the preliminary early designs and prototypes, but that's a big challenge going forward that we really have to pay attention to and invest the right amount of resources in to make that close. Power is also a really critical resource for these exploration missions. Once again, I think the long duration Mars habitation and surface missions are going to be the driver there. But we're looking at a wide range of things. Solar obviously is going to be key. Regen fuel cells, next generation batteries, and nuclear. Nuclear is probably they're going to be the real key for sustainable missions. Again, that's got a large technology development path in front of it to be reliable enough to use with crews. Thermal control systems, those are pretty well-known technologies. For surface applications, you have to, and especially the lunar surface has some microgravity as well as Mars. Putting those deployable systems to operate in a very dusty environment is probably the key challenge there. Crew health and performance, I've kind of already hit on that. Obviously radiation protection was talked about earlier. Microgravity exposure, there's got to be some type of countermeasures for that. Just so when the crew goes out for 1,200 days and they've got to land and fly a Mars lander, that's going to be a challenge. Also, waste and disposal and hygiene. There's some things in crew systems that really need some investment. And then in-space transportation, that's really primarily for the Mars Transit Hab would be the big propulsive element. But there needs to be like a mid-class of propulsive systems that can be used as a tug between LEO and cislunar gateway, as well as to maneuver the various elements around in cislunar space to do shakedown missions. Once again, to prove out the capabilities, make sure that they're ready for crews to go in them when it's time to go. So I talked about commonality at the start. Just an example here of the kind of four major areas where we see habitation being important. On the top there, Gateway is already kind of doing some work in terms of the Gateway interoperable avionics. We hope to leverage that for our future habitat concepts as well. Surface Hab for Mars and for Lunar probably won't interact with the Gateway, but it's a good starting point, and they're going to be rad hard to start with. But once again, the time frame here in deep space, over 15 years lifetime, is going to be a real driver. Talked about primary structure. You really want low mass, and if you can get large volumes with that, that's a win-win for the crew. You have a smaller total propulsion system, and they have more room to spread around. The comment earlier about the two astronauts, or the two cosmonauts in the 18 by 20 foot room is a perfect scenario for murder. We want to prevent that. Open ECLS, once again, really critical. Right now for LEO, we do it at open loop, but the farther out we go, once again, we need to close that loop and minimize the amount of resupply that is required, and in some cases, it's not even feasible. Talked about batteries across the portfolio there. Thermal control, body-mounted radiators really preferable. Once again, any kind of a deployment just creates another risk scenario, but in some cases, you're going to need that. And then crew quarters and crew equipment for exercise and EVA. I think we're in pretty good shape there. We've got a lot of experience from ISS that we can leverage. But the thing there, exercise is probably not going to be adequate for microgravity. There may have to be some type of in my view, some type of a system that creates various levels of artificial gravity, either by spinning the vehicle or something needs to be worked on there for sure. And then back to the importance of proving ground. I think NASA's plan to use LEO, cislunar space, the lunar surface, all to prepare for Mars is really a smart move. Builds on our Apollo experience, right? We kind of did that incrementally over time. Gravity is, once again, the partial gravity is going to have to be dealt with for our surface systems. Dust is really bad. We all know about lunar regolith, but there's also some concern about Martian dust having perchlorates in it. It's also very fine, so we need more understanding of what the long-term exposure to that is for our Mars applications, and also the atmospheric effects on Mars. There are lots of high winds, and there could be some other materials in the atmosphere that could be hazardous to the system. So a really significant ground and flight test campaign is needed to qualify these systems to make sure the crews are absolutely safe and we have a successful mission. I think that is it for me. Maybe.
All right. Well, thanks, Mike. Appreciate the discussion and kind of the overview that you provided. Next up, we're going to go to Eleanor Morgan. She's from Lockheed Martin. She is and make sure I get this right, so the Habitation Architecture Lead for Lockheed Martin for Habitation development programs. She has been in this role. She oversees both the technical and mission architecture development for both orbital, surface, and transportation spacecraft from low Earth orbit and future expeditions to Moon and Mars. So with that, Eleanor, would you take us away?
Great, thank you. Can you all hear me? All right, wonderful. Well, hi everyone. Pleasure to be here today. It's such an exciting topic. Wonderful information that both Danny and Mike have talked about. So I think this all fit in real well here. So what I'd like to talk with everyone today about is kind of piggybacking on this, some of the development efforts that we're doing at Lockheed, which tie into some of the gaps that we're talking about and the forward vision for eventually getting folks to Mars. So how we approach this, how I think most of the companies are approaching this, really the proving grounds, right? Earth, Moon, Mars. It's going to be really hard to take things directly to Mars if we don't test them out close to home first. So all the things that we're looking at Lockheed and programs, technologies we're developing, that's what we have in mind. And as many of you may be aware, one of the exciting things we had happen last fall was the Artemis 1 mission with the Orion capsule from Lockheed Martin. We're really pleased that went very smoothly, and it's paving the way for Artemis 2 mission, which hopefully folks saw that we now have a crew for that, and excited for that mission to go in 2024. Now, the Orion capsule, so this is really key for us now having some deep space transportation that will be human rated. And this will be taking the astronauts back to the Gateway and then onto the surface of the Moon. So kind of a key step in terms of getting humans back to the moon to start proving things out so that we can move on to Mars from there. So in addition to transportation and crew capsules, one of the other areas, kind of the area I focus on, is habitation development. And one of the key technologies that we're developing at Lockheed Martin is inflatable habitats. And why expandable habitats, inflatables, do you ask? Well, as we look more towards the moon and Mars, anything beyond low Earth orbit, right, mass is still going to be a factor. It's going to be very challenging, and you may have very long missions. So, having a large volume, compared to a lower mass ratio is definitely key. And so, as you can see here, just a couple pictures of some things, takeaways, right? When we're in low Earth orbit with the ISS, that took a lot of assembly flights to put together. When we launch things beyond low Earth orbit, we really want to streamline that and simplify it. And if we can find ways to have single launch to orbit or minimize the amount of outfitting, as Danny was talking about, trying to do this at the gateway, getting all the architectural elements out there, that could be challenging. So we want to minimize how many flights we can do there. All right, some of the additional reasons why, obviously, expandables can be very helpful. Landers taking folks down to the surface of the moon. That's still a challenge right now with regards to the amount of mass that we can put on the surface of the moon. We're excited for some of the new landers that are going to be coming online and new announcements soon about that, those contracts. And so, if you can save any mass to put some structures on the surface for humans to actually do their exploring on the moon and test out the rest of these technologies, then that's going to be very important. All right, one of the key milestones we had recently, the end of last year, was we had a successful subscale burst test. That was a 1/3 scale unit of our common habitat size that we foresee utilizing for, low Earth orbit, moon, transit to Mars. As you can see in the left picture, there it is. In the right picture, it is not there anymore. So, but it went well. We're very excited about the results we had there. And, little known fact is that, while some people get nervous about the idea of living inside an inflatable habitat, it actually has higher safety margins that you have to meet as opposed to metallics. So 2 times factor of safety for metallics. Well, we got to meet at least 4 times factor of safety for inflatables. So, but we're very excited because this will help actually enable the Artemis astronauts to spend more time on the surface of the moon and do some more exploration. Now, when we send people to the moon, they're going to need some other things, right? You can't just set up a house if you don't have any power or communications or anything else like that. So, as was discussed, technology gaps, there's just some key infrastructure that you also need to have present for people to execute these missions on the moon. And that's areas that we're also working on at Lockheed Martin right now. We're right now in a partnership with General Motors and MDA working on some lunar rover concepts for lunar terrain vehicles. So we're really going to need mobility, especially if we want to explore as much of the lunar surface as we can. We can't set up camp just in one location. We need to be able to move around and relocate. One of the other things is power. We're also working on vertical solar array terminals there, and that's going to be really important, especially at the lunar South Pole, getting the height there where we can actually, get some rays of the sun to have some power there. Fission surface power, that's another area that we're working on. That's going to be really key, especially in dark areas and craters and for surface infrastructure that requires a lot of power. And communications navigation. Parsec is the name of the new satellite constellation that we're going to be launching here in the next couple of years around the moon, and that'll also be providing some very important infrastructure for future exploration missions. All right, and what does all this feed forward to? As we've all talked about here, this all feeds forwards to getting us to Mars. As you can see here, this is a future vision. One of the concepts that we have for an architecture to get humans to Mars. One of the other key enabling technologies, as Mike also mentioned, nuclear thermal propulsion. We're part of the Draco program at Lockheed, and we also really see that as a key technology to enable humans to get to Mars. Especially as quickly as we can. We want to minimize the amount of radiation, the effects on the human body from prolonged periods of microgravity. So for many reasons, that's going to be a very important enabling technology. So with that, I'll kind of leave you with some fun pictures here of what some visions could look like. And I will say, none of this is achievable by any one person or company. And so, we definitely look forward to working with all of our industry partners, academia, NASA. It's going to take everyone to make this vision a reality. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Eleanor. Appreciate it. So I thanks again to the panel for the introductory talks. And as I was taking notes as we went through those, and I seen there was a couple different themes that I saw come throughout, and I kind of want to touch on those a little bit as we enter into kind of a discussion portion. And we'll open it up to the audience for some questions here in a little bit. But first off, I want to have a couple questions for the audience or for the panelists. So this is going to be generic for everybody. I want to hear kind of each of your thoughts on this one. So each of you kind of came about the habitation discussion from different viewpoints. NASA looking at it more from, hey, how does this fit? How do the pieces plug into the individual or into the overall architecture going from LEO up through Moon and into Mars? Boeing piggybacking on that, but again, looking at how those all play in. Lockheed Martin was very similar, but looking even, I think, more holistically along more of an ecosystem kind of framework. And similarly with Daniel with Blue Origin, kind of looking at it from that holistic standpoint. For each one of you, where do you see, I don't want to say technology limitations, but where do you see the advancement, especially with the current framework of advanced composites, AI, 3D printing, additive manufacturing style setups? How do you see those playing into the overall habitation? Danny, I'm going to start with you.
So, AI, getting to true Earth independence, I think is going to be fundamental, right? We're a long way from, we can send a crew for a 3-year or 2-year round trip and really understand that we can do that with an acceptable risk. So we need to exercise those systems, in our HO in the lunar vicinity where you have a fail-safe, you're not completely relying on it. So AI is very important. There's a lot of work. You mentioned 3D printing, constructed habitats. We're all about habitation. So in the long game, that's a big thing, right? You will not see that in the earliest of the architectures. Things about maybe constructed landing pads, radiation protection. Those are more near-term architectural uses. But yeah, the technologies for something like the Mars mission, Mike did a great job. We have similar graphics. I think they match almost the same. ECLS, lots of work has been done. NASA has invested tremendously. Industry's invested tremendously. There's still gaps and challenges, right? We would not be surprised at all if we are able to get a transit habit gateway in the early to mid 30s, which is our plan, that it's not the full ECLS solution that goes with it, there's an ECLS 2.0 augmentation before the Mars mission. So there's lots of work. It is fundamentally a challenge, and we're doing a lot of work, but there's still gaps. And part of our job on the habitation side for NASA is really digging deeper, and we're doing that right now. And used to be, right, for a technology gap, you say, well, I need to be at PDR about this year because I'm going to Mars about that year. Mm-hmm. Now, because of the work we're doing with industry and the reference architecture we have, we say, no, you need to have that for that launch year. You need to have that particular technology on dock flight hardware this quarter of that year. So we're trying to dig a lot deeper and optimize the technology investments, identify the gaps, and find solutions.
Awesome.
Is this working now?
No. You're still in the handhold mode,
At least
my friend.
key, especially with communications, right? That's a good question that you posed, Mike. I think a couple things. Investing in technologies right now is critically important. We're trying to leverage, as well as the other industry partners, the ability to have a partnership with NASA through STMD, as well as through other contracting mechanisms, to focus on the really important things. And that way we've got the best of both workforces, and that we've got the best of industry working to try to get that problem solved and get a system that works. I I think we're learning lessons from our ISS experience. Now, I wasn't around when ISS was, I was around, but I wasn't working on the design. But I think we could have done a better job of integrated testing before launching potentially, or just maybe it was a money thing. But for the Mars missions and things like that, reliability is going to be really key. I think we have to have demonstrated data to show that the systems are going to work. We can't just run one quick life test for 60 days and say, oh, we'll just extrapolate. We need some real runtime. So back to your point, it's doing it on the ground, doing it at space station, doing it at Gateway, running those key systems. And then bringing in advanced technology when it makes sense. Like there may be I know there's some work going on advanced materials, potentially that you could infuse to help with radiation protection, for example, when you actually forge the metal or when you build the composites or impregnate the inflatable. Do something to work on radiation protection. Anytime those new technologies come in, we need to look for a plan to infuse those as fast as possible, in my opinion. And I think that's kind of the key from what we need to do development going forward.
Okay.
You got one.
Eleanor?
I'll keep mine.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with everything you guys have said. Yeah, I think the key thing that, as Danny was saying too, that we see is what those technologies that need to happen. It's really deciding when do we need to start working on that, because at the point at which that needs to be at a certain TRL level, if we haven't already been investing our money in this beforehand or found other terrestrial applications or other use cases and places to test this out, then we've missed that. So, and that window for Mars keeps getting pushed out then. So yeah, I think working with, key industry partners and really working with partners outside of the space industry, that specialize in some of these certain areas where in the space industry, that's not our expertise, but maybe we should work with people, for example, like automotive industry or the construction industry, or even like biomedical. So a lot of these industries, working with experts in that area is going to be key as well for this. I know you guys both touched on it, but I would also, the radiation protection too. I think is huge. That's still something that we don't have a great solution for right now. We sent up the company STEMRAD. They had an AstroRad radiation vest that was sent up on some mannequins that we had inside the Orion, the Artemis 1 mission, and we are very much looking forward to getting that data back. So I think for everyone in the industry to really understand what is the radiation profile that astronauts are going to experience beyond low Earth orbit. So that's a key area too, and we need to come up with better ways to protect our astronauts on these long journeys. But yeah.
Oh, and Daniel, before I come to you, I want to interject on that. I mean, part of it is I think actually in Daniel's presentation, he touched on a little bit, is looking at that holistic view of how much protection do we need, and where is that risk profile, and how do we play that? Because again, are we? Well, I don't want to get too deep into that before I let Daniel talk, because I don't want to take his. We'll table that and we'll come back to it. How's that?
Yeah, we should definitely talk.
If you look back at especially at the Apollo program, there was a point to get there, but then all the trickle down that came off with the technological advances associated with landing people on the moon greatly enriched the economy for years to come afterwards. I mean, we still are relying on. A lot of the foundation of our modern society was based off of what we did in the Apollo era. So I agree. I think that it's something to enter into the calculus that we haven't necessarily priced into the equation as we talk about current investment needs. But no, appreciate the discussion. Getting back to the discussion we started on a little earlier, was the risk discussion. Now we talked about kind of how we want to do the analogs both on the Earth's surface, LEO, in the lunar vicinity or on the lunar surface. How do you see those playing into the overall risk profile or risk management effort? As far as, we've kind of alluded to it a little bit in the conversation thus far, but where would you care to expound upon that? And Danny, I'm going to start with you just because you kind of have that bigger architectural picture.
Right. I'm not exactly sure, because I was going to a little different place on risk, but maybe this is what you're,
Well,
it's similar. So we talk about, will the technologies be ready? You saw a lot of red on your charts, right, and yellow. Will they be ready when we need? So we have an opportunity right now, with the current agency leadership, there's a big push, right, to say, let's get the architecture defined, establish a plan and dates, because we have these pre-formulation teams around certain elements. We get a date, that's the goal. Now we can refine, no kidding, detailed level of understanding of where the risks are, what are the things. Yeah, it's great to invest in that, but maybe at a lower level, because it's not that minimum architecture that Daniel was talking about. We have the opportunity to get focused and optimized. So instead of just kind of shotgunning, hey, I think those are technologies we need, we can start to say, but these are the ones we need. And then this is the second set we need for being sustainable. So we can identify those risks and start to, no kidding, manage them and make decisions on how we're investing to give us a much better chance to get in there. So I think it's a great opportunity, actually.
Yep. No, and that actually gives me a point to, and Chris, I'm going to give him some points here. There's been the ongoing Achieving Mars workshops that are really kind of looking at how do you identify some of those, what are the long poles, and how do we integrate that into the overall technological development associated with getting to Mars. So, and I think it's going to take a concerted effort to continue that as we continue to flesh out that architecture. So, Mike, we'll go around the horn again one more time.
Talking about risk, right?
Yep.
So looking at the system, right, or the systems for the habitat, you burn down risk by doing testing, right? We do early development and do testing and get data to see whether designs are right and they make changes. So you can eliminate so much risk right there. You're never going to get it to zero, right? So we just have to realize that. So we'll try to do the best job we can with our analogs for, like as we talked about. The other part is I think we're going to learn a lot about ConOps when we do these analog missions, not only to operate the systems in their normal nominal mode, but also how to deal with off-nominal situations, right? If you have a unit break or something go wrong. So I think we'll get smarter in ability to plan for those scenarios where we're not having 100% reliability. I think it'd be hard to get 100% reliability in all the key systems, but we need to be pretty close.
Yep.
And so if we can work on our ConOps to do repair and replacement when you need to, I think that's really key. Another angle that I'm thinking about is, in terms of spare parts, manufacturing your own parts, as opposed to taking pre-developed systems, 400 kilogram boxes. Maybe you bring the raw materials where you can additively manufacture a few of the key components. I think that's going to be a key part of the risk and reliability story as we go forward as well.
Okay.
And that's so you can do that also, not only from in the in-space habitat, but it's ISRU, right? ISRU is another way to do that as well. I think the key is we need to drive risk down as low as we can. But ultimately, somebody's going to have to decide whether they want to get on the thing and fly to Mars, right? Yep. So if we can get a crew that's comfortable with that, and we can get all the stakeholders comfortable with that, I think we'll be in a good spot.
Well, I think one of the things we have to be careful of, I think if we ask any of the astronauts, I don't think you would really care what that risk level was. They want to be on that ship.
Yeah, they want to go. Yeah, we probably know where that boat's at. But when they do FR, there's other right involved. But yeah, I think that's kind of where we need to go.
Okay. All right. Eleanor?
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot more to add, but I guess kind of, Mike, to your point, yeah, the commonality and like the spare parts, that is just going to be key with a lot of these systems. And, you can't take a lot of mass with you to the moon, especially not to Mars. So we really need to be holistically designing these systems where you're using the same tools for all the systems to fix them, or we have the 3D printer with us for additive manufacturing along the way, so if we don't know what's going to break, it's okay, we can solve it. I think that's going to be key, and really balancing the risk. We're going to have, all the systems will need to reach a certain TRL level, of course, to be part of the mission and part of the architecture, but maybe we balance that with some systems are tried and true, like it has flight heritage, whereas other ones, it doesn't, but this is really what we need for a mission to Mars. This needs to be closed loop eclipse, or some different types of technologies we need. And so anyways, and I think, yeah, the risk profile, I mean, obviously, that also comes down to when we talk about taking risk. I mean, is it within the system? Is it just like the person, or is it the company developing it? I mean, where does the risk lie? Who's paying for that mission? Who's on the mission? Is this, NASA astronauts? Is this a private mission? Everyone has their own risk profile too. So, but yes, so it's going to be an area we'll have to work on.
I agree. I think the part of the to your point, the gateway competition, as we went up to where they awarded Halo, that kind of ground truthing of that, and actually having people go in and interact with full-scale mock-ups was really critical to actually being able to make that make an informed down selection, as opposed to just looking at specs on a piece of paper and actually going through that. So again, your point's well taken. So I want to expound on that a little bit. Again, I've been kind of leaning more towards the technical side, and I want to get into something that Daniel brought up earlier, was the human element and how you design for the human element, not just from an ergonomic standpoint or from a are they going to survive standpoint, but from the more holistic, how does the human live in that situation? How do they thrive in the environment you put them in? So Daniel, I'm gonna throw that question to you, as far as how would you encourage people to really take that into account when they're working through the design process and the habitation elements?
Human factors, human-centered design is also near and dear to my heart. In a previous life, I was in the military, and I was the end user for certain systems that weren't designed well. And so that was one of my vows, was like, if I move into the new industry and I'm helping design things for people, I'm going to make sure that this is actually what they need, it works well for them. And so yeah, I mean, I think that is going to be really critical, is focusing on that for our future systems, because these are systems where people may be there for a long time. I mean, obviously in the ISS, people have stayed there for, like a year and things like that. But, for a trip to Mars, that's gonna be a long time. So it's not like you're going up for a week somewhere and you can put up with it, but, it's not ideal. And so I think one of the key things that I would, encourage folks, or, that I would like us to do or continue doing is, when it comes to designing things, engage with other, as Daniel mentioned, engaging with other stakeholders, reaching kind of outside maybe within your group or your team or your company who's developing it, and like engage some experts that are really focused on human things. When we did a collaboration project together, with Daniel's prior company, that was a great opportunity for engineers at Lockheed to interface with someone on the architecture side whose main job it is to design spaces for people on the Earth, and that was really important. I had a prior experience being involved with one of the NASA analogs, the Human Exploration Research Analog at JSC, and that was a really awesome experience to take that with me and move forward into a role at my previous company as a crew systems engineer, and leading some of our human-in-the-loop testing that we were doing for habitats. And so just, sending engineers to go experience things like that. Yeah, having people, as you mentioned, Daniel, who have the experience engaging the astronauts. I think there's been some previous panels here for like the Astro Access. Folks that don't have like your average capabilities, they have different capabilities, and I think that's super valuable. So just really that holistic input when you're designing a system is going to be important.
I agree with everything you said there, for sure. Keeping people thinking about them in the early design phase. That's something new, I think, that we're going to start to do, and there's been some conversations up here and out in the audience about that, so I think that's really good. So a couple things come to mind when you're thinking about crew health and performance, right? So if they're, say, for example, the long distance journey to Mars, right, 1,000 days, they're going to be in that hopefully big, large volume in space, but they're still not going to be able to see trees or plants. There may be some vegetables growing, but they're not going to be able to see those outdoor panoramic viewscapes, right? So I think figuring how to use AR and VR to get people to feel like they're not isolated in the middle of space, even though they are, I think that'll be really important. We use AR/VR right now for training purposes, right, and actually for design visualization. I think there's a space for it there. Making sure that the crews have ability to communicate with their family and loved ones back home. It's going to get increasingly harder the farther they get away, and it's hard to have a conversation with whatever 5, 10, 15-minute latency. That's going to be hard. Maybe even at the moon for a little bit, right?
Right.
So some way to work on a comm system. I know you can't overcome the speed of light, but something that promotes seamless communication with your people back home. The third one, I think, is really important. We haven't talked about it a little bit. We touched on it. The need for a very reliable toilet. It's very important. It's crucial, right? It is crucial. It's one of the. It's a problem, right? And we need to fix that. I think that goes.
All hands on deck when that happens.
That's a big deal. Those are kind of the things that popped in my top of my head.
Okay. Danny?
I don't know that I have too much to add, but I think, you mentioned, I'll put a plug in for my BAA, Next Step Appendix A. It was during phase 2 that the industry, all of you on stage had, your company at least, was involved in that. And getting actual crew reps into those real semi-high/low fidelity mock-ups produced a wealth of knowledge, some of which we were able to make public. More detailed stuff went off to every industry team. That's not the solution to, hey, how can I get my head around a 3-year round trip mission, the whole, how's one psychologically survive that? But it's part of it. It goes to, your toilet's got to work. You don't want your toilet by your galley so that's an important thing, and we need to do more of that, and that was a great thing. One thing that came to my mind early, and it's just a small example, is the notion of food production. Quality food that's not, freeze-dried and all that for a long duration mission, that's one thing, and the quality of nutrition. But there's a lot in the just having another living thing and things on the mission that they can tend. I like to garden. That, to me, that's a hobby, right? So there's probably many, many other things like that we as engineers and scientists probably don't think about, that we need to start. What are those things that really max value for their quality of life? I think also, it may be unattainable, but getting to where you don't have to spend all your stinking time fixing everything, where you can actually have, maybe in that mission, they have a hobby. Maybe they're poets, and man, can't you do some great poetry from a mission of ours?
It's inspiring landscapes that you could write a riff off of.
Exactly.
In the time we have left, I'd like to open up to the audience to have a couple questions. I think we'd like to hear get some questions from you guys and kind of see where it takes us. I see we have someone up. You want to give a brief introduction of yourself, name where you're from, and then and shoot for us.
Sure. Michael Mealing, Starbridge Venture Capital, maybe one of the only investors in the room. There have been a few recent, several companies looking at building commercial habitation systems, basically competing with Thales, specifically VAST, Gravitics, and MaxSpace, building habitable volumes. And this is a sort of a two-part question. The first is, are you guys considering using purely commercial providers as opposed to doing some of these things in-house? And as a general flavor, as NASA is moving more toward public-private partnerships for everything, especially if you listen to Administrator Nelson's testimony yesterday, how are you changing the way you're thinking about doing this for those that are also looking at CLD customers and implementations, to actually moving away from the way we would have done this on the ISS? And actually using a lot of these providers, because as an investor, I'm looking at companies that are talking about providing systems to companies like yours, everybody up here. Is that viable, or are we still stuck in the do it all in-house or use cost plus contracting on a lot of these things the way we've traditionally been doing, because I can't find that investable?
Okay, tough question. I don't want to speak for NASA. I will say, and I speak for industry a little bit in this case, is we're always looking for external partnerships to infuse new ideas and new technologies into what we do. That's part of what we have to do. We can't come up with all the ideas on our own, even in concert with NASA. There's not enough brain power associated with in those organizations to do that. How to on-ramp those into the overall architecture is at least from my lens, is probably how do we do that? I don't know that we have a clear answer in that quite yet, but I think it's definitely something that, at least from Northrop Grumman standpoint, that we're out there looking. Mike, Eleanor, you guys have anything to add to that?
No, I follow what you're saying. I'm tracking. It's a different world now than when ISS was built and put together and is now it's many years of operation. So we're changing the way, at least at Boeing, we're changing the way that we're approaching working in this field. We still 100% support NASA's mission, right? That's why we're here, to make sure that they're successful and that it moves our space forward. But we're looking, you have to look at the risk profile from a publicly traded company versus a private company.
Yep.
And so you got to kind of pick your spots a little differently than we did in the past. We are engaging with a lot of it's incredible that 5 years ago, there was a few new space companies. Now there are hundreds, right? Thousands. And they all have different and it seems like they have little different niche technologies, and you can stitch them all together. You can come up with something really good. I think it's an ongoing process, and that's what we're going to be doing. But I think there's definitely a role for the small commercial companies. The problems I think we laid out today, right? ECLS, crew health and performance, there's some key capability areas that if they're interested, we're looking for solutions, and we would love to work with them.
Great. Yeah, I'll toss in like 2 cents. I think similar to what you guys had said, the large companies in the industry, we're always looking to have partnerships with other companies when it makes sense for what technologies, we don't want to do. So we can't do all the things, so we also have to pick and choose what do we want to focus on, and and as important as that question is, it's as if not more important, of what are we going to not do? Because that just doesn't make sense, or financially make more sense to outsource that. So it really depends on the company. So I would kind of encourage those companies to reach out to the larger companies, have that conversation with them, and really just understand what niche can they play for different architectures? What are we looking for, right? For the CLD that you're referring to, you have a couple teams out there right now. You're an investor. The most challenging thing right now is money, right? And so I think a lot of those teams, a lot of folks are working on, NASA's not footing the bill for all of that. So it's hey, does the business case close? Do we have enough customers to make this viable? That's a really challenging aspect of it. And so I think, if there's, and I think that's probably what the industry is struggling with, because there's just not enough data yet. You're yes, eventually there will be, but is there right now to support the funding? Financial landscape, obviously right now, not the best. But, I think there will be. It's just trying to figure out the timing of that. So I think just, encouraging those companies to reach out and just start engaging with the larger companies, and to what you said, too.
And with NASA, making
And
sure,
with NASA,
because
absolutely,
there are a lot
NASA.
of programs that are out there that NASA has for
Yes.
small businesses, especially in the tipping point arenas.
Yes.
So there's a lot of stuff out there for dollars specifically for those hard things. So I would encourage them to go out and look at that. Daniel, you have anything else that you'd like to add to that? Sorry to interrupt, Eleanor.
No, okay.
Yeah, hi, I'm Mark Rosenthal, Personal Creations. I'm a producer, designer, and currently involved in themed environments, immersive art installations. And I was very interested by the last section that you mentioned around mental health and creating environments that are conducive. And in all the talks I've been hearing, really incredible engineering and visions and all of that, but I've never actually heard anyone say anything about art. And from a mental health perspective, having art of some kind in these missions, to me, seems like it would be a huge and very small investment in supporting mental health. So I'm curious what you all might have to say about that, any access points to that, any thoughts about discussions that are going on about that.
Yes, so I asked for that one, didn't I?
Yep.
So just for the record, I'm an amateur artist on the side, so that's probably the reason I resonate with that. I'm one of those guys that's off doing the engineering, the project management, program management, so I don't really know how much that's being considered, but certainly it should be, right? And it doesn't have to be, hey, I have an artist and now you're a crew member. It could be, all the crew members do multiple things, right? So that should be an attribute under consideration for selecting crew members for some of these missions, especially long duration missions, right? I'm just not in a position to speak intelligently to whether or not we're really doing that, or how far down the road we are to doing that.
Well, and more specifically, not necessarily the crew people being artists, but I noticed like in the renderings, there are no paintings, there are no monitors that might show art. And
Well, and
what
I
I'm getting
think-
at is
right.
having,
I think one of the things we got into when especially when Mike was talking about AR and VR, is trying to find something that's low mass that's going to be that
Yeah.
we can take in there to be able to utilize for those. And I think that's kind of the thought process most people are taking. Not necessarily art installations inside, but how do we do that? Virtualize these so that you can take advantage of that.
And one of our industry partners that I won't name, because they're not on the stage, actually had a concept of like a whole video wall.
Yep.
And Ellie knows what I'm talking about. So yeah, it's out. That is definitely out there in the consideration. How do you give them that human
Right.
space that's not just
They got to have
technical
some me space and
cold
some ability to the human factors element that's not necessarily a technological thing. So as much as I'd love to get to additional questions, those people who have questions that want to talk, we can talk offline out here. We're coming up to the end of our time, so I want to thank our panelists for the engaging discussion, and appreciate the audience for indulging us. Thank you very much, and turn the time over again.
Thank you, Mike.